Welcome back to the Open Web Forum at CogX, curated by Fabric Ventures. The final panel before a short lunch break posits that we have a new kind of role, the full-time token holder, and asks how decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, can encourage participation in their governance. Moderating will be our Fabric family member, Anastasiya Belyaeva, who co-founded Fabric Ventures back in 2017 and led the charge on our venture platform. She now heads growth at PieDAO, a DeFi community making tools for wealth creation accessible to all. Over to you, Anastasiya.
So guys, I'm the co-founder of a project called UMA, or UMA, Universal Market Access is what it stands for. We're a decentralized financial contracts platform where we provide infrastructure for developers to create financial agreements, which can look like things like synthetic tokens track anything, or this thing called KPI options that I think we'll talk about later, which is an agreement between a DAO and token holders to achieve an outcome. And the way we work is we provide kind of two things as a protocol. We provide these financial contract templates to build these agreements, and we provide this Oracle system that's controlled by our token holders, controlled by our voters, to resolve disputes and outcomes related to those agreements. And as such, our Oracle system is actually a DAO. It looks like a DAO, but one with specific features around voting and how we incentivize voting that I'm looking forward to talking to later. Mark, you want to take over next?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Ziller. I'm happy to participate in the Aave protocol. We are the first lending and liquidity protocol on the Ethereum blockchain. And we allow anybody in the world without any barrier, bottleneck in a frictionless and permissionless way to deposit liquidity and take that liquidity in exchange of paying interest to suppliers of liquidity. And we like to think that protocols such as Aave are middleware and building blocks where other parts of the DeFi community can build great services upon, and basically enable a lot of synergies. And just like UMA, as being part of decentralized finance, we are a decentralized protocol. So the Aave governance is a decentralized autonomous organization, so DAO. And every modification of the Aave protocol has to be voted in by the Aave community of Aave asset token holders.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys, for jumping in and saving the day while I was fixing some audio issues. And welcome, everyone. It's really great to be back at CogX for what I think is the 5th edition, if I'm not mistaken. And it's actually the first time for me on the other side of the stage, not organizing it. As Ian mentioned, I co-founded Fabric back in the day and now became part of the PieDAO community to lead growth. So yeah, it's really fantastic to be back. So this session is really meant to be one of the few honest discussions about what is actually not working in DAOs and protocols. And that is voter participation, which tends to be pretty low in the space. And I think we've got probably the most fantastic lineup to talk about it. Some of the leading projects out there and DAO platform. So I think it's really exciting. Thank you guys for doing the intros. So, jumping straight into the first question, to set the scene, I'd love to understand what the current average voter turnout is for each of your platforms. Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. That's actually a very interesting question because, the main noticeable point about voting on-chain is that you actually pay to vote. That's probably one of the first systems where people need to cover some transaction fee to get their vote. And the second interesting things about vote in DAOs on a public blockchain is that usually it's pseudonymous, but if you are a non-actor, everybody knows what you are voting on and what is your decision for your vote. So that's very strange and not pretty common in other voting systems. So that's the first thing. And the second thing about the voter turnout is that what we observe inside the Aave protocol and most protocol is that you have a core community of very involved individuals or entities that will do most of the heavy lifting in terms of voting. So on Aave, you have anywhere, depending on the votes, 30 to 50 individuals or entity that will show up at every vote, and we vote no matter what with like sizable amounts. And what is interesting as well is that, like many DAO in the space, we embrace the fact that we have a small, very involved community, and basically natively built vote delegation and proposal power delegation. So what emerged from that is that now you have more and more in DeFi protocol politicians. So entities or individuals that are deeply involved and deeply active into the governance and say, okay, this is my vision of the stuff, and I will vote on that. If you think likewise, delegate your proposal power to me, and I will represent you. And that's some kind of interesting things in terms of liquid democracy and how things work.
That's super interesting, actually. Thank you for touching on that. That's something that I'd love to dive into a little bit further on as well. But it's interesting to hear that you guys have a very strong base layer of voters that vote no matter what. But how much of the protocol, sort of like of general token holders, does that represent, that amount of?
That's well below 1%.
Well below 1%.
Last time I checked, there was like more than 80K Aave token holders, at least address. It's very hard to know which entity or individual is behind each address because everything is pseudonymous on a public blockchain. But you have like 30 to 50 address voting for more than 80K address that own the asset. So yeah,
that's a really great benchmark to have. Hart, how does it look for you guys? What's the sort of like general number that you could put on that?
Yeah, so our voter participation relative to other projects looks pretty good. We have between like 20 and 25% voter participation, but that is primarily whales. So this is similar to what Mark is saying. It's primarily our larger token holders are like our core base layer of voters. So it's only like a few hundred people. And I think what's interesting, what we've done again is like our whole notion of voting here is a different concept where the core crypto economic design of the protocol is that you're really voting on data and whether like a price is correct or not. So there is a known kind of concept of like what the answer should be, like what a truthful answer is. And this is very different from the idea of like voting on governance where, you know, it's unclear what the right answer is.
It's very subjective, right?
It's very subjective. Now we do layer governance votes in on the same price data voting system. So we've kind of like, it's actually, the history of it is quite interesting where we designed this system without thinking about governance. We're like, hey, we want to just vote on price data. And then we're like, well, we also got to vote on this governance stuff. So we're going to use the same system. And we incentivize or reward people for voting with the majority. So this is a very interesting concept that when it comes to governance, might not make as much sense. When it comes to price data, it's actually a crypto economic like game theory thing where we reward people for voting correctly and we penalize people for not. So we have this interesting architecture where people are actually rewarded, you know, the annualized, like if you're a consistent voter, it turns out to be like a 30 to 50% type return. If you're a consistent voter, it's pretty significant. But you're rewarded for voting consistently and correctly with the majority. And the other thing we've done as an experiment too, to try to incentivize smaller voters, like the less big holders, is to pay for their voting costs, to reimburse their voting costs in our project token. So we have a slightly different problem. We have pretty good voter participation, relatively, like considering, particularly when you exclude the non-circulating supply of tokens. It actually looks like our voter participation is closer to like 50%, but we don't have as much distribution as a protocol like Aave, mainly because we're also not as consumer facing and don't have as broad token distribution.
That's super interesting. Okay, so sounds like there are issues, but they're not related necessarily to the sort of like how much of the network participates, but rather like that the majority of them are just whales who tend to take a large percentage of the network votes. Interesting.
Yeah, they're not all whales, but there's like one of the things we want to work on is having greater token distribution. So greater, like, would we still have the same voter participation when our token distribution gets to the stage that Aave is at? You know, I think that is an unclear question.
Interesting. And I'd love to direct the same question to Alessio. And actually, if you don't mind doing a quick intro, because it seems like while I was having my audio issues, you haven't had the chance to intro yourself. So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that and then pass on the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Alessio Delmonti. I'm a PieDAO coordinator. PieDAO is a decentralized asset manager, which is covered by DAO token holder. It's actually a DAO which is built on top of the Aragon infrastructure. So I'm very happy to see Luis over here. The way we use governance within the DAO in PieDAO is that members are pretty much reasoning like and debating on the creation of tokenized investment portfolio, which are very much designed to generate yield on the underlying assets, but also to sort of minimize the user previous knowledge on using this investment portfolio. So governance-wise, we use the entire coordination game to curate those financial portfolio, but also vet different yield strategies, and of course to do the core selection of the assets within the portfolios. That's a quick intro. Regarding the specific answer, like I think PieDAO is relatively new, like to the space, and in that sense, like it doesn't have that much. I'd say like token holders compared to big projects such as Aave or like even UMA. That said, in terms of participation, we have been observing a couple of things. We started as an on-chain organization where like participation was overall pretty low for some of the reasons that, for instance, Mark has been highlighting before, which is like gas cost. That could be pretty intense sometimes. But like since we have been sort of switching to a more of a gasless environment, we have been registering like a pretty significant core amount of members, which are consistently voting, which is interesting. I think we are in the, like between 56 to 60 users are usually voting in basically every single vote, which represents at this point maybe 2.5% of the entire network of token holders. So that's not too bad compared to others. And we also register like a pretty significant diversity between token holders, as that we see a lot of newcomers either voting for the first time, and then eventually there is some stickiness in that regard, which we find to be interesting. Like we don't have sort of super, many whales like kind of controlled in the game, even though there are some whales, but like their participation seems to be overall limited. And also something which I find quite interesting is that I would say like at this point, especially since like the last 6 months, the vast majority of new proposals are coming spontaneously from the community, like not from anyone or sort of any institution which is sort of related to the early adopters, which I think it's interesting, as we see more and more like expanding the interest from real users, which are kind of getting closer to the community and start engaging with the governance system and eventually make their own proposal on their own. So yeah, like in terms of that's about the participation. We are now like I've been talking a lot about how to improve like in terms of participation and apathy, particularly from a resilience perspective, which we think is quite important. And actually, we are gonna do some interesting stuff like pretty soon.
Let's get to solutions soon. I'd love to kind of like set the problem space first, just so we can kind of get a clear understanding of what the standard in the space is at the moment. So, finally, want to pass that question to Luis, who will probably provide a more sort of like overall picture of generally how do you feel, the voter turnout looks in crypto. And if you could also do a quick intro on yourself, that would be great for the same reason as Alessio. Clearly, I've skipped that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Luis Cuende, co-founder of Aragon. Aragon is one of the earliest projects that has been working on decentralized governance tooling. And so our framework for DAOs is one of the most widely used in terms of people just creating DAOs very, very quickly and not having to create a kind of like custom implementation. And so we've been working on this problem since 2016, arguably too early, as DAOs are only taking kind of like traction now. And I think in terms of voter participation, like, well, I really agree on many of the points that people here have touched upon, because obviously they have really lived these problems from more of like, I guess, crypto protocol perspective, where you need something, you need a very specialized group of people that maybe know about finance, technology, smart contracts to take decisions. And I think that is really important, and that is really
different from also DAOs going mainstream, which actually is like one point that I would like to touch upon. So like, I think we have like that group of like very crypto specific DAOs, and then you have something that is a bit more generic, less kind of like scientific, if you will, less about changing parameters and more about maybe kind of like certain beliefs or certain goals or kind of like yields. And I think for that other use case to flourish, actually I think we're doing very well on the crypto protocol side. I think we definitely need better UX. Like if you think about crypto today, crypto is mainly desktop first. Like we use MetaMask. We have very high standards for security, of course, browser sandboxing and such. And we actually don't use mobile for much. Like mobile wallets are kind of like getting there, but still not that good. Still you kind of interact with Web3 using your mobile wallet in like a not clunky, terrible way. So I think like push notifications for voting could be really fantastic, or stuff like that, right? Again, it's more on the mainstream side, more than the like, I guess, delegation side, because in protocols like Aave or UMA or even PieDAO, you need people that are really deep into the parameters and really deep into like a mixture of like finance and smart contracts and all of that. But if we want to move to like more mainstream DAO adoption, I think UX is very important.
Thank you, guys. I think this is super useful to kind of like set an understanding of what the issues are right now. One thing I'd love the answer from everyone on, and just in one word, yes or no, for the moment, is do you feel like the current level of participation you're seeing in your own projects, and Luis, for you in general in the DAO space, and in Aragon specifically, do you feel like it's sufficient or not? And can I give kind of a quick yes or no? Let's start with Mark.
It's a good start.
It's a good start. Okay, great. Alessio?
Probably not sufficient, or like not yet at the level which is desirable.
Great. Hart, what do you think?
No, I don't. But it's funny how people don't want to answer yes or no.
It is funny, indeed. I love that. Luis?
I'll go for a hell no.
Great. Okay, interesting. I think we have an optimist here, Mark, which thinks it's a great start, and then everyone else seems to be kind of more on the no side. So, to set the targets, what do we think is the optimal level in terms of the percentage of the network of participation for a given vote? Would be great. Again, just a very quick number. Mark?
To me, it doesn't make sense to have a real number. I'm sorry, I will take slightly more time to answer than just a word. But like in my country, there's 230 congressmen. That's Portugal, because there's 10 million inhabitants. And basically, DeFi is all I do. I spend 16 hours a day involved in the community, and I myself, as someone deeply involved in the community, don't have enough time to keep up with all the ecosystem that I want to keep up with. Like, for example, PieDAO is a great project. I was very involved at the beginning, and I lack the time to be as involved as I want to be there. And it's not something that is realistic to think that in the future everybody will be completely up to date to every single protocol out there that they want to be involved with. And it's completely normal that when an ecosystem is young and small, just like in ancient Greece, because there were like 40,000 citizens in the whole city of Athens, it was easy to implement direct democracy. When the whole thing grew and basically became more complex and more developed, we switched from direct democracy to a new model that is called a republic, a representative democracy. So I think the future is to have more people involved through delegation to protocol politician, because if you don't agree with the people or the entity you delegate your vote with, you can remove that delegation power at any point with a single transaction.
Interesting. That's a fair point, that sort of, we cannot expect everyone to have time to dedicate to every single community and ecosystem they're part of. And so delegation is the answer. Actually, Alessio, I'd love to hear your views. Do you think this would represent the community's views accurately? And do you think sort of like that level of participation as it stands now, or the delegation of votes, would be a fair way for DAOs to operate?
Yeah, I think It depends, right? Like, first of all, there is a distinction to be made about sort of application-specific DAOs, which kind of behave like on their own, and that's, I think, the case of UMA to some degree, since they have a very specific way of using governance to determine like a sort of objective data. But even in that case, like, participation should be, pretty high, because otherwise you end up with, sort of unreliable data feeds. So that's not desirable. That said, generally speaking, I feel like the risk of being, coming out with sort of non-representative outcomes for voting is very high. And I completely understand the point that eventually people will not have all the time in the world, like, and then they will not be able to sort of keep up with all the different communities. But on the other side, I also do feel like, as we have been observing pretty much everyone within our own communities, that there is kind of a core sort of layer of governance people. Like, it would be fantastic to expand that. And the reason why it's great is that, like, at this point, DAOs are pretty much used as sort of a social layer on top of DeFi protocols. And a lot of these protocols are reliant on human interaction to one degree or another. Like, and then having sort of like a very little sort of user base, like being extremely active, well, it's not resilient, right? Because like something can happen to that. And then secondly, it's going to end up potentially being extremely non-representative. Like, and then if we see, sort of in some other space, like not only like regular politics, which is obviously one of the spaces where, by the way, like the participation is pretty high, right? Like the number of votes is lower, but like if you look at stuff like presidential election, they usually end up almost always plus 50%, like even 60 to 70. But
in Russia, it's 120. Just bear in mind, in Russia, it's 120, guys. That's the target. That's where we should be aiming.
Okay. Yeah. So like Putin that. And then but like even in some other contexts, like even the corporate world, like traditionally speaking, we see sort of pretty high participation, kind of sitting within the 70%. So totally understand the delegation part, totally understand like it's, people will not have time, but I think there is a lot of margin of improvement. And generally speaking, for anything which is sort of, and that's going to be an arbitrary number, but anything which is sort of below the sort of 30% of the network, like it cannot be considered resilient in any way.
Interesting. Guys, do you agree? Hart and Luis, any thoughts on that in terms of the benchmark that would be sufficient?
Yeah, I think it's potential to ask whether it's the right question or the right metric, which is sort of what Mark is saying a little bit. Like direct democracy is a hard concept. And I think the idea of having super high participation in a super specialized application via direct democracy is maybe a hard goal or hard objective to achieve. I think that you can think a lot of like, you can look at shareholder governance, and you can look at, if we take a riff on like what kind of Mark is saying, take Amazon, right? Amazon shareholders elect a board of directors who then go in turn elect a CEO. And there's this principal agent problem, like, are the decisions of the CEO reflective of the will of the wishes of the board of directors, and are they reflective of the wishes of the shareholders, right? In this sort of like, is are the actions representate, like, do they represent the shareholder willpower or desire? But I kind of think models like that, where the broader token holders elect committees or technocrats or kind of smaller subgroups to make more specialized decisions, maybe that's the more appropriate model for how the DAO space evolves.
Yeah, I agree, and also think that in application-specific scenarios for protocols, like, again, it just doesn't really make sense to have people without knowledge voting. If you think about like countries, for example, like you don't have citizens even in direct democracies that do a lot of like referendums or constant polling. You don't have deciding on like very technical things. Like if you had the whole population voting on whether we should wear masks or not, or like very technical kind of like questions about COVID, for example, like would have gotten out of hand very quickly. On the other hand, I think it's good to have people voting on things like, should we invest more into like, going into like an arms race and investing into like military, or should we invest more into healthcare? Like kind of like higher level things that are more about values and beliefs more than technical details, so to say. So yeah, I think you can have both. You can have very high participation in those like belief-based decisions, and also have very specific kind of like delegation-based voting in very specific applications.
Interesting. I think that's a very fair point in terms of, when we enter the world where our identities are kind of split across a bunch of different communities, we're part of our country, we're part of different DeFi communities, we have a family, whatever, different things, it's really hard to keep up with what's going on in each and be a very active participant and voter in each of these. But I guess that kind of leads me to a thought, there's probably a model to think about where each voter makes a decision on whether or not to participate based on how critical their vote will be to sway that particular decision. Do they feel like if they don't participate, something is going to get out of hand and they really feel against that particular decision? That probably is something that would make them vote and would make them feel really proactive. Right, so it's kind of like, do we agree that in a scenario where the majority of the voters agree with a predominant voting result, or sort of like the polling result, they are less likely to participate, and in a situation where they feel a strong disagreement, they will be more likely to jump in. Do you guys agree, or what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely, yeah. And the craziest or the kind of like more opportunistic or flashy kind of like headline or voting, the more people vote. That's the thing. We had actually an example of the Aragon association by Polkadot, like dots or not back in the day. And I can tell you, Ethereum community went there and like voted like there was no tomorrow. Like that was one of like our highest turnout like votes ever.
Any other examples from you guys?
There's one happening right now on Aave, actually. So most of the AIP on Aave are very reach some kind of consensus, and you have like 99% yes on most votes. It's because we have the ARC process, so it's before a proposal goes into a vote, it's actually heavily discussed with the community on governance forums and these kind of things. But anybody in the world, as we are decentralized, that has enough proposition power can skip all the discussion process and go directly to vote. And that's basically, and I will not give an opinion on it. Everybody has to do his own research and decide if it's good or wrong or whatever. But basically the Ride project, so Ride is a very good project that do a stable coins, a decentralized stable coins on Ethereum, skip the process and go directly to an AIP vote. And this is like one of the first controversial votes on Aave right now, with a lot of no vote and yes vote and some kind of discussion and heated discussion about it. And it's very interesting because when you look at the addresses and the people participating, those guys usually, they don't participate in other votes. So there's definitely silent part of the community that is always on the verge of being active if they need to. Or if they
it's kind of like the backup, the fallback, right? The kind of community where if something goes out of hand, they're ready to jump in.
Yeah, there's definitely some reserve in the community on that sense.
Yeah, and I think like we've been seeing this like a number of times within the Ethereum space, like, or generally speaking, like in DAOs, like, and I think it boils down to sort of a couple of different things. Like controversy usually brings a little bit more participation, just because it's it feels like there is almost no reason to kind of explicitly like vote when you know like you are on the majority side, like, and things are gonna go through. But like on the other side, I also feel like sometimes it depends on the well, pretty much the perceived benefit of like of the outcome of the vote, which many like may not feel like they will bring like a very major benefit like for any specific vote, but like they do it when they do. When there is like some very controversial issue, or like they are kind of defending their own ideals or something, right? Like, and that's kind of the personal gratification aspect of it, which is like, okay, I'm actually fighting for someone. That's kind of the backstop argument. That said, I also do have the feeling that, or at least what I've been observing, is that almost any vote which has some sort of financial implication usually does include like a greater participation, right? And then we've been seeing that within PieDAO, but I think also in other DAOs, when everything which is sort of related to incentives or liquidity mining or anything like that will have greater participation. So like that suggests to me that these sort of expressive benefits are more significant sometimes of the intrinsic benefit from a voter perspective.
Got it. And Yeah, I definitely agree. I think contentious issues and sort of discussions that are more likely to lead to a significant change, particularly financial, tend to provoke more action. But let's kind of like take a step back and talk about sort of this rational choice model, where it's kind of like a cost-benefit decision for every particular voter. So on the benefit side, what do you guys feel are the most effective ways to incentivize people to take action, right? Apart from the fact that whether or not the vote is critical, what are the ways that we can actually actively incentivize people? I know Hart has mentioned a couple of things that they have done successfully. Alessio, do you want to take this on while you've been kind of talking about the earlier thing?
Yeah, sure. Like, I think we've been thinking about this for like quite a little bit. It's been like an active conversation within our community. We always been trying to come out with a governance model that was answering a couple some different problems. Like one, we really wanted to create a model which was directly connected to the success of the DAO, and then sort of fulfill the promise of connecting protocol revenues to DAO governance. We thought that was always very important, and as such, we wanted to create really a culture that promotes the sort of long-term alignment instead of short-term benefits. And we kind of like to think about that as the concept of having a citizen of the DAO instead of like a sort of tourist of governance, like coming out and making just random decision across the different things. So in that sense, we have been quite concentrated on the idea that, of course, because in DeFi protocols, token holders are both governors and also they're governed. Like, we want people to have sort of pre-eyed skin in the game, and like we feel like there are some solutions like implementing sort of lockup for token holders would be like a powerful tool to measure the interest and also kind of signal the legitimacy of governance rights. That's something that we've been thinking a lot, and then using that, basically a combination of time and commitment to basically amplify sort of the voting power of people. We think it's quite interesting, and that's something that we are gonna test it out pretty soon, with the underlying assumption that sort of long-term aligned incentives and like a long-term capital and having sort of economical implication to your own decisions will lead to a better outcome.
On this topic, there's two initiatives that I want to highlight that was very interesting. One is not enforced anymore, but in the early days of YEarn, the only way to benefit from the profits of the YEarn protocol was to be active directly on the governance vote. And if you were just a passive token holder of the Wi-Fi ecosystem, you won't get any rewards. The community then decided to deprecate that model, but that was very interesting. And something that is live right now is that actually on the MakerDAO community, if you are an active participant on their governance forum, you get paid. They have like a budget for that, and I received like, I'm not a very active participant, but as a participant inside the MakerDAO community, I think I received a few $100 over the course of a few months. And that's directly incentive, not directly the vote, but the participation and the meaningful participation in the governance discussion, which are, I think, at least as important than the actual act of voting.
Interesting. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that what we really want, like the whole goal here, is how do we make voters like impassioned? How do we get them to like really care, right?
Exactly.
And I think, although it sounds sometimes a little bit crass to talk about economic incentives, I do think like the core of the crypto system is that we are relying on economic incentives to drive incentives. And so, yeah, Anastasiya, one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier is like we've been playing around with this idea of something we invented called KPI options, where you take a project token, you create a synthetic token that pays out based on achieving some metric. And what's cool about this is you can, in concept, create these tokens, create these KPI options for some objective and give them to everybody. And then it sort of is a certain way, what we've kind of seen inkling of is a way to create some passion, because now everybody's like, wait, I've got this thing, that if we achieve this objective as a team, like collectively, if we achieve this objective as a protocol, we get some collective benefit. And then you have people like kind of, it almost like creates some contention where like, wait, I think this, I think that, and you force people to hash it out to see if they're going to actually hit that KPI or hit that objective. And so I think a concept that's just, it's not related to KPI options explicitly, more generally, is like, how can we use the economic incentives built in our protocol to actually almost like create passion and create contentious issues to actually inspire people to get more actively involved? I think is an interesting idea.
I think that is a really fantastic tool, and honestly, like I'm almost surprised why that hasn't existed before you guys come up with it. Like, it's really an incredible way to use the crypto economic incentives to really kind of align the community action and benefit from the fact that you're a DAO, you have a community of people driving it, and they shouldn't just be involved in votes, but they should also be driving the sort of the rest of the action, which is really cool. And Luis, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know you guys have been exploring KPI options for Aragon, and you had some thoughts also on generally sort of the use of prediction markets, and you're a huge fan of the idea of futurity. So I'm gonna pass that on to you.
Yeah, I think futurity is such a like amazing tool, and once people once we start like learning how to use it, which is like technically very, very hard, I think it's gonna be huge. I could talk for it about about the topic for like an hour. So I think it's
we've got 3 minutes though.
Like, focus on exactly something that is like way more kind of like real now, and that we can try out now. And so like you think about the internet, like 1% of people create content, 9% kind of like tweak it or like repost it, and then 90% just consumes. And so I think governance is going to be something similar, where like 1% builds something that is worth governing. And so that's, in my opinion, where KPI options really come like very handy. And then for the 9%, I think it's going to be those who govern the protocol, and then 90 who just kind of like sit down and benefit from that or participate in like a very minor way. And so for that 9% that actually govern the protocol, I would like to see a way better user experience. And then for the 90%, maybe some delegation. So that's how we are kind of like seeing it, and that's our bet for how it will look like.
Thanks a lot for that. I think there's actually some really fantastic thoughts that I'm sure other DAOs and protocols out there will benefit from in terms of ideas and sort of tools they can use. One last topic I'd love to touch on in the past, in sort of the last 2 minutes that we have left, is something that I feel is pretty critical to the whole promise of the crypto space, and that is the inclusiveness, right? And the concept of everyone being able to participate in it, to be impactful, to be part of these communities, and that is the question of the costs. So how do you guys feel the on-chain costs of making a vote influence decision making, and is there anything that you think could be done or we should be doing to address that?
Very quickly on this, when we started Aragon, voting was like around 1 to 2 cents on Ethereum, and then it became like 20 or 200 depending on the day. So yeah, we're trying to move everything to layer 2. It's like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think from that perspective, like we've been having like a very direct experience, right? Like we at some point, like voting within the on-chain DAO, like was costing like $150, like a pop. So that's obviously unsustainable for the large part. And yeah, like when we kind of switched off like to this concept of gasless voting, and I think we're going to move more and more on that direction, like especially with sort of optimistic voting and on-chain execution. Like we've been, sort of seeing like great benefit in terms of participation, like, and that's a key part. Everything else.
Complete consensus on this as well on the other side. We are actively working and developing a way to make sure it's accessible to every single address to vote without a cost that will leave anybody on the side. And we want to develop that to make that available and make that open source so anybody can in the ecosystem can use that. And that's one of the main objectives in the short term for us.
Hopefully, once we see more of that, we'll see also a change in the level of participation. So I really think that's something that will have a significant impact. Fantastic, really great to have you guys here. I think we're up on time. One last thing that I would love to give you all a quick round to mention is your Twitter handles and what you guys would like people to, where you guys want to be followed, and any questions that you want to take after the panel. So yeah, Mark, do you want to go?
My Twitter handle, it's Lemiskate. You can find me directly on Twitter. And I make a lot of weird jokes. Be prepared to what you will find there. If you want something that is more easy to access, you have directly the Aave Twitter handle. And most especially concerning what we talked today, I think it will be very interesting to dive into the Aragon DAO, which is an independent community-led initiative to basically develop new projects upon the Aave protocol.
Awesome. Luis?
Just follow Aragon project. It's way more entertaining than my personal handle, and there's a lot of stuff that the team is working on. So yeah, Aragon project.
Alessio?
Yeah, you can find me at Alexintosh on Twitter, but yeah, also follow like PieDAO_DeFi. Like you will not see me very active on Twitter lately, but like you will always find me on the PieDAO Discord. So please feel to join. Like, and yeah, let's talk governance over there.
And Hart?
And yeah, our project is UMA Protocol on Twitter, and then personally, I'm Hal HAL 2001, and I talk a lot about financial engineering and nerdy stuff. So follow me if you want to talk about that.
Amazing, thank you so much, guys. And I'm on Anastasiya VC, and follow PieDAO as well. I'll be there too, or Fabric for that matter. So I'm still part of the family as well. And yeah, fantastic to have you guys, and thank you for the audience for listening. You can probably find the video also on YouTube, and we'll make sure to share the link everywhere on Twitter. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks so much, Anastasiya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasiya.
Thank you.
Masterclass in moderating, and thank you to the panelists. I'm certain the conversation will continue on Twitter. Talking about governance, I always think of this phrase that the great thing about democracy is that everyone gets a vote, and the problem with democracy is that everyone gets a vote. So increasing delegation for specialized and various technical proposals makes a ton of sense to me. I'll have to see what the optimum ratio for that actually turns out to be. So thank you again to Anastasiya, Mark, Luis, Alessio, and Hart. A super fascinating discussion. I wholly agree, some of the best people to approach it. We now have a lunch break, but starting at 2 p.m. BST, we have Ilya Zinchenko, co-founder of Entropy Network, to tell us about the road to a scalable data network across organizations. This is the Open Web Forum at CogX, curated by Fabric Ventures, and I'll see you back here in an hour and 17 minutes.